Give me a second, guys. I have a connection issue. Okay. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, the Mai, Pedig Daled, Halacha Aleph, learning Daf Lamed Daled. We left off on the top of the Amid. We learned yesterday regarding the first part of the Mishnah that on Shabbos, when you ask the seller, the Am Haaretz, who sold you the Mai in the previous week, if you ask him whether he tithed it, on Shabbos he has Nemanus, and that Nemanus, which is, as we interpret it, reliability, not necessarily trustworthiness, but we rely on his testimony on Shabbos, and that runs out automatically the moment Shabbos goes out. So we had yesterday two opinions as to why do we rely on the Ma'aretz on Shabbos. The first was Kavod Shabbos. Kavod Shabbos means we're b'chlal, not trusting him at all. It's the Hefza of Shabbos, it's the Kedusha of Shabbos itself that takes away, or lachatchila, the rabbinic obligation to tithe the Mai is not on Shabbos because of Kavod Shabbos. Why b'chlal do you have to ask him? We're only looking for a pretext for an ilah. And the other approach is Ema Shabbos. Ema Shabbos, let's go, it goes on the Gavra, that because of the Kedusha of Shabbos, the person himself is more trustworthy. There's still the possibility that even because of the Ema Shabbos, he'll lie. There is that possibility, which is why right after Shabbos, you have to go back to tithing it. And as we finished in the learning yesterday, according to the Rambam, that not only do you have to separate the Mai tithings for that which remains, but if there's any leftover food from that batch of the Mai, you have to separate Matzah Shabbos, the tithing separations for even that which you ate. Wow, Shitas Rambam. But on Shabbos proper, Ema Shabbos, and therefore you are allowed to eat it. Now, what the Gemara doesn't mention explicitly is that the same that is said for Shabbos is said for Yom Tov. Because by Yom Tov also, midrabanan, tikkun mana, one is not allowed to tithe on Yom Tov. And same scenario, that if you bought produce from Eyam Haaretz, and now it's Yom Tov, now you want to eat it, you can rely on the testimony from the Am Haaretz for that day of Yom Tov proper. That is something that the Gemara doesn't even have to verbalize. Now, question that we will begin today's daf is what's going to happen if you have two holy days that are consecutive, which would either be Shabbos Yom Tov Shabbos, we're speaking about consecutive back-to-back, or the 2 days of Yom Tov in Golus, 2 consecutive days of Kedusha. And the question will be, is the testimony of the Am Haaretz on one day, on the first of these 2 holy days, automatically also good for the second holy day? Or do you have to ask on each day for that day? What is this contingent upon? What does this depend upon? It's contingent upon whether we view 2 days of Kedusha that are consecutive as Kedusha Achas or Shtei Kedushas. Now, Chevra, just quickly reminding ourselves, this is a topic that we had in Bavli regarding Shabbos and Yom Tov. We had it both in the beginning of Masechtas Beitzah. And we also have it on Eruvin Daf Lamed Ches. Shabbos, Yom Tov, Shabbos. There is a machlokes Tanoim, whether it's Kedusha Achas or Shtei Kedushas. Now, guys, we all know that not all of the laws of Shabbos apply in Yom Tov. By Yom Tov, Oichel Nefesh is completely permitted, and not only is it permitted to do malachas that are connected to Oichel Nefesh, but we have the rule, Pascal like Resilo, that Metoich Shehutra Lutzorech Oichel Nefesh, Hutra Nami Shaloi Lutzorech Oichel Nefesh. Right, with the exception of something that you could have equally done and it would have been equally as fresh prior to, etc., etc. But regarding the dinim in which Shabbos and Yom Tov are the same, regarding the melachas that are common to both, Kedusha Achas would mean that we view those prohibitions as beginning in the first day and ending at the end of the second day. It's one consecutive day, Kedusha Achas. Shtei Kedushas would mean, of course, both days are holy and both days have their dinim, but each one is a day for itself. Same that we have regarding Shabbos, Yom Tov, Shabbos, we have in Beitzah, Dafdal, Domid Beis, then again the 2 days of Yom Tov. And there we have the machlokes between Rav and Abasi. the machlok is there, if you remember, Chedra, is now that we established, right, machlok is b'sham and b'silim. But we paskin like that a beitza that is born, an egg that comes into the world on Yom Tov is asur. Those are the words. And now the question will be, what happens if it's 2 days Yom Tov of Galus? So the egg was noilad on day number 1. It's here. Question is whether it's mutter by the other. Rab holds noil de bazeh, muteres bazeh. 2 kedushas, 2 separate days. Ravasi holds noil de bazeh, asura bazeh, kedusha achas. So that now bring it to our topic. Our topic is that the Amoritz is believed on Shabbos because of Kavod Shabbos, because of Amos Shabbos. The Amoritz is believed on Yom Tov for the same reasons, Kavod Shabbos or Amos Shabbos. Kavod Yom Tov, Amos Yom Tov, Shabbos Yom Tov, same. What do we do if they're consecutive one with the other? If you ask the Amoritz on Shabbos, if Sunday is Yom Tov, can you automatically continue to eat that Demai on Yom Tov or not? Whether it depends on Kedusha Achas or Shtei Kedushas, whether it even L'Kula Alma, we'll see. We're going to have something even more important. I know it's not such a long daf. We have time to speak it out. We're going to chazer the Gemara in Beitza, in Bavli, Daf Daled Amud Beis, in which the Gemara makes it clear that Rav Asi, that says Kedusha Achas, only says so L'Chumra, not L'Kula. I'll explain what that means. The Yerushalmi's understanding of Kedusha Achas is not only L'Chumra, but even L'Kula, Befedish. In other words, there's a machlekes, Bavli, Yerushalmi, how are we to apply the inyan, or how do we understand the inyan of Kedusha Achas? That will be the first topic that we'll learn today. The second topic will be really, there's different ways of learning the Gemara, but the way we will learn it, the Marafulda will learn the second topic of today as a continuation and an argument with the last line we learned on the Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. And there, the Gemara made a point that even if a person has that same type of produce that is completely mi'usar, that means, for example, I have apples that were properly tied. I have apples that are demai. Since my Yetzer wants the apples that are demai, even for that, I could rely on the Amoritz, which is the big chiddush. On that, we're going to learn that Rabbi Yoina, the way we will learn, Rabbi Yoina argues with the concept of Hayetzer Ta'uv. That was our Girsa. And actually, from there, we're going to already quote the next Mishnah of this Perek Halacha base. When you learn the Mishnah over there, it sounds like this heter of relying on Amoritz because of Kavod Shabbos, because of Amos Shabbos, to eat the produce, the mai, on Shabbos is very limited. It sounds so from the next Mishnah. We'll speak about the case. And it appears that there is a contradiction between this Mishnah and next, and the Gemara and Daf Lamed Daled already will introduce that there isn't any such of a contradiction. They both work with each other. And finally, which will be the final very topic, this is a Gavaldik, that when do we say that you believe the Amoritz, you have to know how to ask. And this is really a big takeaway. When you ask someone a very black and white point blank question, if they're not the most trustworthy people, they actually might lie. To be careful. When prior to asking, you give them a way out. I would understand why you would have forgotten. I would understand why you would have thought that it was done. You actually already give them a way that even if they're going to be moided that they didn't hide it, or even if they said yesterday that they did and they'll own that they didn't, that you're not going to look at them that they're liars. You're going to understand that they forgot, that they overlooked. When you ask in such a way, only then do you rely on the Amoritz. You have to know how to ask him for you then to say that if he insists to say that he tied it, you're taka kamuli. That will be the final topic of today. And now, let's start on top of the Amid, Daf Lamed Daled, all the way on the top. Says the Gemara, Yom Tov, which is Samuch l'Shabbos, in either direction. Whether it's Milafoneo, whether it's Friday Shabbos, whether it's Mila Achareho, which we keep 2 days, so there are consecutive days of Kedusha. And as we just spoke out in our words of introduction, both by Shabbos Yom Tov, Eidodin, Daf Lamed Ches, also on Beitza Daf Dal, both by Shnei Yomim Shel Galiyois Daf Beitza and Bavli Daled Amud Beis, where we had this machlokes either Tanoim by Shabbos Yom Tov or Amiroyim 2 days of Yom Tov, whether it's considered Kedusha Achas or not. Says the Gemara, Man the Amar Kedusha Achas. According, let's connect. If you hold that it's considered one extended day of holiness, So then if you ask the Am Ha'aretz who sold it to you on the first day of Kedusha, whether you tithed it, and we have this Gavaldik Heter and this Pedig Dalad and Demai that you believe him, so that you rely on him. That reliability continues also for the second day. Why? Because it's one day, it's Kedusha Achas. Oichel means you get to eat it on the second day based on his testimony that he gave on the first day. You need not ask him again. However, man, the one that says that it's not considered one extended period of holiness, it's considered two distinct periods of Kedusha, even though they are back to back, even though they're back to back. But for example, Lamay Nafkamina, like we just mentioned, a Beitza, Shamol the Yamtiv is Asur. But if it's 2 days of Yamtiv in Chutz La'aretz, so if it was born on the first day of Pesach, you can eat it on the second day. Why? Because you can say that really there's only 1 day of Yamtiv. If it was born, if the first day of Yamtiv was Yamtiv, what's today? Cholamoyed. You can eat it. If today is Yom Tov, yesterday was Erev Yom Tov. An egg that's born on Erev Yom Tov can be eaten on Yom Tov. The fact that Minig Abuseni B'Yodena, and we have to keep 2 days of Yom Tov, but it's distinct. So if it's considered two Kedushas, Eino Oichel. Eino Oichel with me, my friends, means that not you can't eat it. You can't eat it by relying on the testimony that he gave yesterday. You have to ask him again. But if you ask him again, and he's going to say, what do you mean? I'm a liar? You're going to see how you ask him at the end of today's daf. And he says, no. It's completely separated. Again, you rely on him. But you have to make a new ask because today is a new day.
So that's case 2.
That's according. In other words, it's depending on which shita you hold. Kedusha Achash, Shtei Kedushas, accordingly, it will be over here.
So if you hold Shtei Kedushas, you have to ask him.
That's what the Gemara begins to say. And let's read it in the Rashi Ilya. I think in this Amud, we're going to learn a lot of Rashi Ilya. But let's begin. Keep your finger on the Gemara, and let's begin on the top of the right line, the top of the right column. The Amr Kedusha Achas says that Asherilio Gabi Shnei Yomim Tovim Shel Golias Pluta Amoyroim between Rav and Avasi in Beitz and Avdalad and Beitz. By Yom Tov and Shabbos, you have the Machlokes. He brings it's Machlokes Tanoim. He brings it in Beitz and Avdalad Amid Aleph, and I want you to know it's Eidav and Daflamet Ches Machlokes Tanoim. The Tanya Hasam Nolda b'Shabbos Toichel b'Yamtiv b'Yerchel Toichel b'Shabbos. Same thing. In other words, the application of the Machlokes Tanoim is also regarding the egg. It was born on 1 day, Yamtiv. Can you eat it tomorrow? So the Tanakama says yes. Why yes? Because it's 2 kedushos, and Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. That listen, according to Beishamai, there's never a problem with Beitza Shenolda b'Yamtiv. But Adayni Machlekes Beishamai Evrim Toichel, but Beisil Oimnim Loy Toichel. But let's go back to the Rashi Ilya. Man, Kedusha Achas Oichel, the Kulu Chashuv Yoim Aruch, because it's 1 long day. So you asked him today, and you rely on him for today. However, man, the Amr Shtei Kedusha is Eino Oichel. Why? Because as we learned in the Mishnah yesterday, once it gets dark, which means once Shabbos comes out, this reliability evaporates. L'Rambam, even retroactively. The Hachashcha and V'tanan Chashcha Matzah Shabbos Lo Yochel Ad Sheya'aseh Gevaldik. Okay. Now, I want to just say one thing. We have time for it. The Gemara in Beitza asks Akasha, for those who remember, which is the Ravasi is the one that says Nol de Bazeh Asura Bazeh. Why would you hold so? Because it's 1 day. It's 1 day. Ravasi used to make Havdalah between the first day Yontiv and the second day Yontiv. Don't freak out. Rashi over there in Beitza writes that he would make Havdalah not over wine, he would make Havdalah in the Shemona Esrei. Which anyways, you're not adding another bracha. No, it's Havdalah that we say in the Shemona Esrei. We're not adding another Baruch Atah Hashem, which is a whole thing of suffix bracha, levatol. But you say words of Havdalah. So the Gemara says, hold on. If Ravasi says that the egg is that was born on the first day of Yom Tov is us and on the other, what does that imply? It's 1 kedusha. If it's 1 kedusha, why are you making Havdalah? Says the Gemara, Ravasi really had a doubt, and therefore he only says 1 kedusha lechumra, not lekula. So you always have to go lechumra. Havdalah you have to make. We don't make Havdalah, but he made Havdalah. On the other hand, the egg that was born here is Asr Bozeh. Always, you always go L'chumra. our Gemara's understanding clearly of two kedushos is not, or one kedusha is not only l'chumra, it's l'chumra l'kula. The Gemara here is saying that if you hold kedusha achas, which is ravasi, even l'kula, you don't have to ask the seller the amaretz, because you asked him today. Today is 48 hours, as far as kedusha is concerned. Okay, just to make that clear. So that's what they point out, that there's a machloikes, Babli, Yerushalmi. How far do you understand the kedusha achas? In the Yerushalmi, kedusha achas meant mamish kedusha achas even l'kula. Okay, keep your finger in the Rash because I want to keep on reading it in the next piece. Now the Gemara is going to retract. Says the Gemara, listen here. Afilu l'man da'amar shtei kedushos, even if you hold two kedushos, nevertheless, oichel, you could eat on the second day by relying on what he said on day number one. Why? Because now ad, or we'll take out the word ad, because you had no opportunity to tie it in between the 2 days. This is very important. Look inside again, the Rash, 5 lines on the right column from the bottom. Umasik. The Gemara concludes, no. Here, you can still eat on the second day because you were unable to. In other words, the Tama Mishum, the Ein Magbiyam Trumusomaisus, you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to do it. 1 second.
That's a very interesting argument.
So now the Rash has to add something else. Now we have to go back to what we learned yesterday. Kavod Shabbos, Emas Shabbos. This logic, since you couldn't have done it, therefore you have a head that even if Shtu Kedusha is, you know where that fits more with? Kavod Shabbos. It's take, because what we said by Kavod Shabbos is, B'chlal, you're not relying on it. You're not relying on it. Because of Kavod Shabbos or Kavod Yantiv, you can eat the mind, so to say. So it makes more sense to say, and another thing we learned yesterday, guys, that when do we say Kavod Shabbos? Only b'shoigit. The Mazit you can't. There's no Mazit. There was no time. So shoigit, you couldn't have done it. But what about Ema Shabbos? Ema Shabbos means we actually believe him. But we're saying the belief on him expires at night. So it expired. So just because you couldn't do it, how does that work? So that's really what the Rashi is going to try to explain. That the logic of the Gemara works when you go with Kavod Shabbos. The logic that the Gemara is saying doesn't work that much with Ema Shabbos. The whole sugya is only based on Lamanda Amar Kavod Shabbos. 3 lines from the bottom on the right column in the Rashi sugya. Our entire sugya. Asya only commando Amar Mepnei Kavod Shabbos. Because the Ilu Lamanda Amar Ema Shabbos, Ema Shabbos means you actually, there is a certain level of trustworthiness. So he says, even if you're going to say 2 Kedushas, even if you're going to say 2 Kedushas, you trust in him. So there was never even a Havamina. Rashi Elio saying that if it's, you trust him, if it's back to back, for sure you rely on him. The Havamina was that if it's Kavod Shabbos and it expires Motzei Shabbos, maybe you have to re-ask him if it's Shtei Kedushos, and even there the Gemara says you don't have to.
So this undermines the whole argument.
Which
There's no reason for the argument. You automatically have to trust them.
You don't have to trust him. We trust him. If you trusted him
on Shabbos, now you have to trust him.
You don't even have to ask him again.
Right.
He's concluded, I guess, that if the reliability is connected to trust on some level at least, not fully, because one guy doesn't care about Ema Shabbos, but people, because of the Kedusha of Shabbos, let's say the world gets elevated and the person gets elevated and there's more trustability, then for sure, even if it's 2 Kedushos, you don't have to ask again. The Havamina was that Alamanda Omar Kavod Shabbos means you don't trust the guy, but they're matir. Maybe it's 2 different days. Maybe you ask him again. And the Gemara says that it's 2 different days, but since you are unable to do it between one and the other,
don't ask.
So that you don't have to ask. Okay. And the Gemara says, And clearly we have so in the Braisa. The Braisa is not speaking about 2 days of Yom Tov, but it's speaking about Shabbos Yom Tov consecutive. Sha'aloi b'Yom Tov oichel b'Shabbos, without needing to re-ask again. Sha'aloi b'Shabbos oichel b'Yom Tov. Now, what's the raya? What's the raya, blood? So, in other words, maybe that Braisa goes kedusha achas. By kedusha achas, we already know you don't have to ask again. So says the last line in the right column, Rasha Delio, that Lamanda Amr kedusha achas lo yitzre, the tepeklei the chad yomo. This whole Braisa was not needed if it would have been authored by the Tanoim that hold kedusha achas, because of course it's 1 day. The reason why you need to have a Braisa is because the author holds 2 kedushas, and therefore you would have had a havamina. You have to re-ask. That's the raya, the way he understands something about the fact that there is a Braisa must mean that the Braisa is authored by 2 kedushas with the chiddush, the taka 2 kedushas. Beitza shenolda bazeh muteres bazeh. It's 2 separate days. But regarding our halacha, you don't need to re-ask. You rely on him. Okay. And now the way we spoke out in our introduction, and even though we finished the Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, the last line in the Gemara was that even if you have the same product that's properly tithed, you also have this type that you bought prior to Shabbos from the Ama'aretz. You also are allowed to rely on the Ama'aretz, because since your Yetzer wants it, you can have it by asking him. On this, Rabbi Yoina says in the name of Rab Ze'eram that I disagree with that. When does our Mishnah allow you to rely on the Ama'aretz's testimony that he gives on Shabbos, and now today we know also on Yom Tov, Tiftoir, interpret it, qualify it, limit it, only the Peiros shenismacha datoi aleim erev Shabbos. Only if you already had that product before Shabbos. Now, 1 second, guys. You forgot to tithe it. And we learned yesterday that if b'mezid blood, you knew you needed to do it and you didn't, they never gave you the heter. Correct. You forgot to tithe it, but you knew you had it. In other words, you know what you forgot? You forgot to do a halacha. You did not forget about its existence. Our Mishnah is only referring to a case where you knew that it existed, meaning you were planning to eat it. If you don't know something is there, you didn't plan to eat it. You knew it's there. You planned to eat it. Elamai, you forgot to tithe. If you did not rely on it, you forgot you had it. You didn't even know you had it. That means you did not rely before Shabbos to eat it on Shabbos. In that case, loy bida, the heter of the Mishnah does not apply, says the Mahara Fulda, 3 lines and then 4 lines from the top. Our Mishnah is only when you were relying on this Damai. You forgot to tithe it, but you were relying to eat it. You knew that it existed. Or Erev Yom Tov Erev Shabbos, then lo yochel apivklal. Now, why are we saying, how are we linking this with the end of Taf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis? So the Mahara Fulda says that the word tiftoir, interpreted because he's, even though we had it in between today's topic of Yom Tov, which is interesting, Shtei Kedushas, Kedusha Achas, we're going back to what we learned before it. Lefi shekoi atirutza dila'el. The Ka'amar, the Gemara said in Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, hey tza ta'uf, we had the girsa hayetzer ta'uf. Whatever the girsa is, it means the same thing. Which we said, even if you have from the same type, which means like you were not relying on this. Same type means I want apples on Shabbos, I have apples. I didn't even know I had that demai. Then on Shabbos, I have the other apples. I want those. You can have it. No? Quoted by Rabbi Yoina. I disagree with that. The Masnis and Maida, our Mishnah is only Shahoya Soimach Aleya Me'erev Shabbos Shebishel Behechin Oisoi Suuda Me'erev Shabbos Sheichalamach. We're only using a product that you knew you had and you were relying on it. That's what you have. You forgot to tithe it. You forgot to tithe it, but you knew you had it.
Okay. You knew you had the item.
Otazoi. Afilu yesh loy ma'oisa hamin. Hoyel va'al elu soymech aleim l'shabes ve'ein loy tafshel acher. In other words, apples are ready to eat. But let's say you have another product. You have bread. You made the bread from the mine. The fact that you have flour, you can't eat the flour. You have to eat. In other words, you knew you had it. You prepared it. You were relying on it. You forgot to tithe it, but you know you had it. Avo paid us fruit. Fruit doesn't need preparation. Blood. Yayin doesn't need preparation. I know you have to make the wine, but once you have the wine, you have the wine. If you have two, you have a bottle that you bought from the Amam Haaretz, and you have another bottle that's properly tithed. You bought it from a chaver, or you took off the demai separations already. Only min ha'ma'aser, min ha'maiser, kama. It's also to have the demai. You cannot rely on him. Very good. Why didn't we say it right away? So he says, "V'had did not Rab Zeda Adach." Rab Zeda waited. Really, it's Rab Yonim b'shem Rab Zeda. Shehimtin atu siyam kol devar. Because whoever said yesterday, even though we had the 2 dots an hour Gemara, Hayetzer Ta'ov went on to speak about the kedusha achashtei kedushas. You don't interrupt people. So Taka said 2 different dinim. He spoke about oisa min shnei minim. He spoke about kedusha achashtei kedushas. When he finished saying his Torah, now Rab Yonim b'shem Rab Zeda went back to the first topic. Rab Yonim had a son called Rav Mana. So says the Gemara that Amar Rav Mana, I want you to know that Mileihain the Rabbanan, from words of the Chachamim, which I'll quote in a moment, I'll have from that a proof, Misaimin, li Rab Yoina Abba, to my father Rab Yoina. Stam Lahoyer, that you can call your father by his name when you give him a title, especially if he's not present. Okay, even when he's not present, you don't say your name of your father. But he was saying, Rab Yoina Abba, the Tata, and you can quote him by his name if it's not before enough. People should know what's what. I have a right to my father. What's this proof from the next Mishnah? Now, before we come back to our topic, before that, we will quote the next Mishnah. And the whole next Mishnah seems to contradict our Mishnah. And the only resolution, or the better resolution that Rav Mana sees, will only be valid, a good resolution, based on this psak of Rabbi Yoina. That you can only rely on the Amma Aretz if you were relying on it. If you were not relying on it because you never knew it existed, or if you have the same type. You have the same type. You have this wine and that wine. You don't have to have that, then you can't rely on it. Okay, what's the next Mishnah? Says Tanin and Taman, Dartin, Naintish Dartin in another Masechta, in the same Masechta, the same Perek, the next halacha base. Amadar is Chaveri Shoyer Chaletz. A oftenly repeated case that we have in Masechtas Nadarim. Right, let's give names, guys. Reuven and Shimon. Reuven so much wants for Shimon to come to his house. And how does he, so to say, coerce him? He says, listen, Shimon, if you're not going to accept my invitation to come tonight for supper, then all of my things will always be asar on you. You can never have anah from me. He threatens him. But really, it's chaverim. And Reuven would get really insulted if Shimon wouldn't come. Now, what happens if Shimon is a chaver, my friends, and Reuven is an Amaretz? Shimon doesn't want to be forever separated from the stuff of Reuven. He doesn't want to be a muder bahana. Reuven is coercing Shimon. If you don't come to me, all of my stuff is asad on you. And Shimon says in his mind, I would love to go to you, but ich kann nicht. You know why? Because I, Shimon, I'm a chaver. Du Reuven, du bist an Amaretz. Who ate no mamina ala maisrois? Now hold on a second, blood. What did we learn in the first Mishnah? On Shabbos, we're speaking about on Shabbos, okay? On Shabbos, you believe him. So what's the shaila? Like, go there and ask him when you're by his table. Listen here. You will see at the end of today's daf. You ask him with chachma, but you tell him, Just remind you, is a taka all mu'usir? And if the guy says yes, you can eat. That's not what the Mishnah says. The next Mishnah says that Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Shmuel says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. 1 second. Okay. One second. I'm skipping there. When says the Gemara doesn't quote. The Gemara doesn't. If you look inside, let me see which gears if he quotes something. Let me tell you by heart. You know what it says, Vlad? You only believe him on the first Shabbos. You only believe him on the first Shabbos. Like, what are we talking about? What first Shabbos to what? The first Shabbos that he made the neder. So the Mishnah doesn't clarify. You only believe him on the first Shabbos. Our Mishnah made no such qualification. Our Mishnah says that on Shabbos you believe him. Period. On any, you ask that Shabbos. And on Vos made the first Shabbos. Rabbi Yanai Rabbi Shmuel says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. We're speaking about the Shabbos shel pit roit gamia. Again, these words are new for us who are not yet familiar enough with Yerushalmi. Is really a composite of two Greek words. We said that the Aramish in Yerushalmi is Lashon HaKodesh with Greek. In the Bavli, it's Lashon HaKodesh and Persian. It's different. Or it's Aramaic and Greek, Aramaic and Persian. There are two words. Proto means first in Greek. And Gamo means a wedding celebration. When people get married for the first time, it's on some level the highest level of celebration. When people get married on the second time, there's a celebration. It's not that great. So here we're dafka speaking about someone who got married for the first time. And the first Shabbos, Sheva Brachas, that's where you have the highest level of simcha. First Shabbos means that when are you allowed, Shimon, to rely on Reuven, the Amaretz, the host, who really is insisting for you to come and eat with him, only on Shabbos Shel Pid Roit Gamio, only on the first Shabbos, really Shabbos Sheva Brachas. And why did they do that? Because when someone is celebrating such a high level of simcha, there's you know what the vulnerability is? How is it that you didn't come? In other words, if I'm making a simcha, but it's not that level of simcha, I will tolerate people not coming. If I'm making azah simcha, there's going to be ava, there's going to be animosity. No, it's passionate for peace. No, you really have to have a big head. Reuven will be very upset with Shimon if he doesn't come. How dare you? I got married, or my son got married, the first Shabbos, you weren't by the wedding, you have to come. There they were matir. Other than that, you can't rely on him. Now, the obvious question is, hold on, this Pedic began by telling you a rule. Kavod Shabbos, Ema Shabbos, you rely on the Amaretz on Shabbos. Why are we only relying on the first Shabbos of the simcha of marrying a child or marrying yourself for the first time? It must be the only way to reconcile. That's what Rav Mana is proving, that his father is right. B'Shabbos shel pid roit gamiyam. That's only loy b'peile shenismach adata yaleim erev Shabbos. That's speaking about a scenario. Shimon was not planning to eat by the oven. Shimon had his own food. Shimon was not relying on it. When you're not relying on it, Yutaka cannot be soymech on the Amaretz. Only in this case. Our Mishnah, is speaking about a case that you were relying on it. Whether, by the way, it can go in either direction. It can be pashut that, let's say, I'm Shimon and you're the Uven. You invited me, and I didn't prepare a meal. I didn't prepare because I'm eating by you. Then how can I eat by you? Whoever the you is, Mr. Amaretz. So I can always rely on you. That's our Mishnah. In other words, you can only reconcile the first Mishnah and the second Mishnah when you are machalik by limiting that our Mishnah's heter is only when nismachadata yalei me'erev Shabbos. Ubemela, if I have the same, if I have apples and apples, and apple basket number one is completely me'osim, apple number two is the mai, I don't have to have apple number two. I'm not soymech on it. I can have ma'oisa hamin from something that's fully masukin, not like we learned yesterday. I don't care that your Yates wants it. Gay five. So what? You cannot rely on him. This is a proof to Rabbi Yoina. Now that we mentioned the next Mishnah, Zok Gemara that Sho'oloi Shabbos Horishoinam. This is actually a brayso that's expounding on the next Mishnah. B'Shabbos hashniya lo yochel ad sheya'aser oi ad sheyishalenu. No. The next brisa is not speaking about. The next brisa is elaborating our Mishnah, and our Mishnah is not. You were relying on it. So here again, Vlad, I was invited by an Amoritz. I asked him on Shabbos. He told me that he was Mu'asa, and I'm allowed to rely on him. Now comes next week. Again, he invites me. He ends up serving from the same batch of food that he served me the previous week. So what did we also learn today? We learned today like 2 kedushas, 1 kedusha. We learned the only reason why you don't have to do it again, even if it's 2 kedushas, because you couldn't between one and the other. But here you could have tithed it during the week. The Amoritz could have tithed it. There could have been a tithing done during the week. So the Braisa Taka says that the Shabbos Hashniya lo yoichal ad sheyasid, only if Taka it was tithed, or you have to ask him again. In other words, let me say it like this: the reliability that he had on Shabbos expires Matzah Shabbos.
Right.
That's Lamadala today in the beginning. It didn't expire if it's back to back, even if it's 2 kedushas. But if it's separated during the week, it expired. You have to ask him again. Okay. And what's the problem with that? Problem with that is we just said it expired. Says that Ashililio Gaval. Look inside the top. It's 2 little columns. The Shabbos of the Shoina Bitmir, didn't you already ask him? Ella Shaloi Ba Ubavadi Hu Shiyachzik Devarim. Problem is that what would we ask him? The Gemara is asking, what would we asking help? When it's the same batch. When I ask you a question, is this yours? And you say, yeah. If I'm going to ask you tomorrow, is this yours? What do you think you're going to answer? You can't even answer no. Because then you're saying, I lied yesterday. So in other words, I get it expired. The Gemara doesn't mean to say, we got it's expired. But what does asking again help? I want you to know that if it's Kavod Shabbos, I don't think the Gemara asks Kasha yet. Taka doesn't help. But really, you don't have to ask him. We just need a pretext. But if it's Ema Shabbos, so he won't lie. But here he has to lie. Because if he lied last week, he's trapped. That's what the Gemara is asking. Like, what does asking again help if it's about a little bit of trust? He already cornered himself. That's the Gemara's kash. And now again, Rabbi Yoina again, Amar Rabbi Yoina, I'll tell you. Taman bahu d'sha'al al nafshe. V'ram hache bahu d'sha'al choyrani lovei. That when you ask him again, you know how it's done? Somebody asks for you. In other words, you're right. You're right. If I'm going to ask you, when I asked you last week, the same way, on the same food, if I have to ask you again, it doesn't even help to ask you again. We're going to go if Ema Shabbos, because you're never going to say, I'm a liar. People don't do that. Only great tzaddikim do that. They're not moida so quick. But if someone else will ask on your behalf, the person will be more comfortable to say the truth. It has to be that way. And in other words, it has to be asked in a way where there is a higher chance for the person to be moida. In our case, if it's you eating in the same guy's house twice, one week after the other, someone else should ask for you. And now, Rabbi Yoina Boy, let's continue with this logic. Mahu sheyish alenu bechlal. How do you ask? And this that Ashadilio says is not only on the second time, even on the first time. No, we have to be sensitive to the fact, and this is all Ema Shabbos. Kavod Shabbos, the asking is just a pretext. It's a facade. Really, it's mutter l'chatchila because of Kavod Shabbos. But if it's because there is some trust that we give a person on Shabbos, so there's some trust involved, you have to know how to ask. And you don't ask point blank. Never ask a person point blank. It's a mistake. In other words, if your goal is to entrap him, and you know the person is not so emistic, ask him point blank and he'll lie and then chap him. If your goal is to hurt him, if your goal is to give him an opportunity to say the truth, the way you ask is derech akalosoin. You ask him in a indirect manner. What's an indirect manner? Let's look inside that Ashadil Yomamish, the end of the right column. It's very narrow. The third line and going into the left side, Ma'osh Yishalenu, and the answer is yes. You always ask him derech akalosoin. Amas nisan dahasam koyin. And this statement goes on both, whether you're asking him the second time or whether you're asking him the first time. The dafka, the top of the left column in the Rashadilio. The derech akalosoin Don't ask him in a way where the seller feels like you're suspecting him. Derech hakalosin means crooked. Crooked means here indirect. Derech hakalosin hainu. The loylemalei misaknin inu the Are they rectified? Are they misukin? That's called direct. You know why? Because the bavada yomer, he's for sure going to answer misukonomy. And not only that, the yichos will be angry. He's going to say, "What to bismachoshit?" Elo the lemalei. You have to right away open up. Oh, love the anochashadach. You have to open up and say, "Hold on, I trust you. I'm not suspecting you." Abed, you have to give the guy an excuse. So look inside the Gemara. That Rabbi Yoina kedati. How did Rabbi Yoina? Let's go. How did Rabbi Yoina ask? Rabbi Yoina, there was a time that Zivan, right? There's Zavan and then there's Zivan. Zivan means he bought. Zivan chite, he bought wheat min devar chakula. He bought it from a villager. We're speaking about a villager that's an Amaretz. We're speaking about a villager from whom you have to tithe it on Shabbos. He knew he had the wheat. He made bread. He relied on it. Our case, he forgot to separate the mine. So you have to ask. So Nafik Ligabe, he went to him, Amalei, he told him, and he told him in the beginning, Lo da'ano chashalach, ich bin der nish choyshet. Ella, begin the zavnis menachitim. When I went to buy from you the wheat, and v'chamis, right, v'chama means I saw. V'chamis uchlusa Allah. I saw many people buying in your store. So I'm saying to myself, sometimes you would tithe it if you have time. But when so many people are shopping your merchandise, Dilma, the Anshise misakna, you're forgetting to be misakin. Because there was so much tumult in your store. And therefore I'm asking you, misakin havian, will you misakin it? Oh, the guy has it out. Daf lamed hey. And To'an mechaska ilove. Rabbi Yoina didn't only say it once. He says, listen, think good. Of course, I know you were tithe it, but maybe there was a lot of tumult. Amalei, ma ano chashidli. The Amaretz said to himself, the seller, why should I make myself into a liar when I can own up the truth and he won't suspect me of being a liar? Once he gave him an opportunity to say, I didn't tithe it, and he won't be viewed negatively. And he was takamoida. He said to himself, why should I make myself suspect? Why should I can be emes. And even though I'll be emes, Rabbi Yoina is not going to look down at me. He gave him an opportunity to say the truth. And this, again, is not only on the second Shabbos. The bottom line is that for the next cases, Mishnah, when you have to ask him for the second week, you don't even ask him. Get someone else to ask for you. And even when you ask the first time and the other person asks the second time, make sure you ask it in a way where the person has an opportunity to be Maidala Emes, to be continued.